think I've been given the signal to like get on with it, so let's do that. Hey. All right. Oh, more people. Can you all hear me? Is this loud enough? Yeah? Okay, cool. Thank you. All right, let's kick off. Hi everyone, I am Pritika Sachdev. Thank you so much for taking time to come and listen to my talk. It really means a lot. Welcome to GCAP. This is very exciting. Before we check that, yeah, that all works. Cool. So before I go any further, I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional custodians of this land. Sovereignty was never ceded. So this is championing others starts with championing yourself and creating a mentally healthy work environment. This kind of talk came up because I am currently moving through a process in my job where I am moving into a different role, one where more people are starting to look to me as the person of ownership and the person who seems to have everything under control. I say seems to, right? But that's what we do in company situations. We look after others, and often when we look after others, our own mental health, our own self-care tends to fall by the wayside. So this is a bit of a personal talk. I'm going to go through, touch on things like crunch and burnout and why it's bad and what it can do to you. I'm going to be talking about self-care techniques and how we can implement them for ourselves, and well-being tips and a mental health plan that we can basically implement in the workplace and why that's important to have. I'm leaving time for questions at the end, so if I touched on something too quickly or if I, was a bit too in depth with what I was saying, please, feel free to ask questions at the end. Yeah. So that's me. I'm Pritika. I work for Checkpoint. Checkpoint is a mental health non-profit that works predominantly in the games industry. We support and bring resources towards the gaming community as a whole, but also to the game dev community. We have a few projects that were released this year, predominantly for game devs. One of them was the Coping Companion, which was a deck of cards, and the other one was the AAA Handbook, which I will kind of touch on later on in the talk. So as I said, I'm Pritika and I'm the community manager currently at Checkpoint. I've been there for about 2.5 years now, and it's been really good. I work remotely from home and sometimes hot desk at the arcade. My boss is in New Zealand, so we have a team that's kind of global. We have a few people based down here and a few people based overseas, and that gets tricky when trying to manage expectations and manage yourself while looking after others. As I said, I'm currently moving into more of an operational and production role, so that's kind of the standpoint that I'm coming from. All right. Why? Why do I need to take a break? Why can't I just power through and keep working and everything will be okay, right? Yeah, we're going to be fine? No. In my experience, no. Also, I did just make this slide so I can use a Hamilton reference, yes. I've got a bit of research, because that always helps. So this study was done at the University of Illinois back in 2011 and is still used and referenced today. Ever have that moment when you are focusing heavily on one thing? Like say I have my finger in front of me right now, and I'm focusing on it, I'm looking at it, and then it starts to kind of fade into the background. Everything blurs and everything goes out of focus. That's what happens to our brains when we take in too much information too quickly without any kind of break. Constant stimulation is registered by our brains as unimportant. So if we are sitting there thinking that we need to power through consistently, what we're working on eventually just melts away. Like it doesn't even, we don't take it in at all. So it just starts fading into the background. This research had they had a control group and they had a switch group. The control group and the switch group were both given a set of numbers to memorize, and they would have to recite at the end of the research. The control group were given the numbers and then given a series of tasks to do without taking breaks, and the switch group were given breaks in between. Basically what happened was that the switch group saw no drop in their performance. This is what that research proved, is that brief diversions from a task can improve productivity greatly. So all your teachers banging on in high school for you to take breaks while you're studying, they were right, yeah. That's why things like the Pomodoro method is still widely used today. That's a method where basically you work for 25 minutes and then take a break for 5 minutes, and then you work and then you take a break. And that just allows us to just switch off, just for a little bit, so we can keep going, reinvigorated. Burnout. We've all heard about it. It's horrible. It's just unwieldy. It kicks you when you're down, and it keeps kicking you. This is kind of the part where I get a bit personal with it. I have suffered from burnout. I think I was first burnt out about 3 years ago at a previous job, and I left that job very quickly when I realized that I was getting symptoms. The first symptoms that I got was a panic attack. I did not know what that was. I thought I was having an asthma attack. And to this day, because I do have asthma, if my breathing if I get short of breath, I still think I'm having a panic attack, not an asthma attack. These effects are long lasting, and they hurt you, and they hurt your business, and they will continue to do so over time. I still feel effects. The physical effects are exhaustion. So just not being able to get out of bed. Getting sick, your immune system is compromised and you're more likely to get sick more often. Loss of appetite, insomnia, not being able to sleep, palpitations, or any kind of heart irregularities. I still said that wrong. And headaches or migraines. And then you've got the mental side of things. Exhaustion is on there again, because while you may be able to physically get out of bed, mentally you're checked out. You're just not able to stay in the moment. Depression and anxiety are side effects and can be triggered by burnout itself. Apathy, just loss of caring about anything, really. Forgetfulness and isolation. These symptoms are very real and they do hurt. And they won't all affect you at the same time. I think that's the relentless part about burnout, is that they will just, maybe you'll have like loss of appetite one week, and then the next week you're panicky and you're needing to just like stay at home. These will just keep going, which is why we need to start catching these symptoms before they turn into a real mental health condition, and why we need to keep on looking after ourselves and others around us. So how do we do that? How do we cope? With coping techniques. A few weeks ago, I tweeted a call out for people, asking them to share their coping mechanisms with me. Particularly, I asked for when you're going through a rough time at work, but these can extend to any kind of periods of stress. You may notice that I put up the example of any bad techniques. I got a lot of bad technique replies. And I think that's just because, like, misery loves company, right? And clearly these bad techniques resonated for people, like even just looking at the engagement rates with some of these. Like there were more likes on the bad techniques, there were more replies to them. People felt validated hearing that others were suffering in the same way, which is kind of not great, but also kind of good, like we know we're not alone. So I'm going to run through some of the answers that I got. We're starting off with crying on the left side, so that whole column is bad and the other column is good. Crying and hiding often happened in tandem. A lot of people said that they hid out, if they were at work, they hid out in the bathroom or bathroom stall and go and cry, just because I think that resonated with a lot of people, because we don't like showing that we're not coping in a public environment. Which is fair enough. It is a scary thing, it's an overwhelming thing. But we need to get to a place where we can talk about this before someone feels the need to run into a stall and hide out from their workmates. Working harder, again, it's that fight or flight response. It's I can run and hide, or I can sit here and I can work harder and I can pretend everything is okay. And I will continue to take stuff on my plate, because if I stop, that's when I break. So in order to avoid breaking, I will keep working. Buying things, impulse shopping, making bad choices, being around the wrong people at the wrong times, or substance abuse, turning to coffee or alcohol in negative connotations. The good, we've got going for a walk, just closing your laptop or turning off your monitor and leaving your workspace and just taking a walk around the block. We've got a gratitude journal, or some kind of journal where you record things and write things down. And then we've also got writing lists, planning, whatever kind of planning technique you use, and prioritization. I thought this one was nice. Someone said they opened up their emails and they read some nice messages that people have given them, and that's really nice and validating to know that you are doing good work even if you are overwhelmed. And having something tactile available on your desk or in your workspace was also a big one. Someone said that they had plastic spoons that they broke if they were feeling overwhelmed, or had someone else said that they had a bunch of different pieces of paper that they would just fold. I find having something tactile available helps. Personally, when I'm stressed or overwhelmed, I tend to just like play with my fingers, just pull at them a bunch, and after a while your fingers get sore, so it's good to have something there. As I said, all of these bad examples rang true for a lot of people, and that's because when we're overwhelmed, all that mindfulness training, all that good stuff that we know we should be doing goes right out the window, right? That's not our first response. Our first response to fear, like intense fear, is fight or flight, right? We immediately want to either stay and battle and keep battling until for no end, or we want to run and just keep running. So how do we stop ourselves from running? This is going to be the alternate title to my talk. Do what I say, not what I do. I am the first to admit that I am horrible at looking after myself, and I need someone else to be there to tell me how to look after myself and why I should be looking after myself. Often that person that first yells at me, essentially, is my partner. The second person that is there for me is my boss. She is there and telling me why I should take a break, and actively giving me time off, paid time off, to look after myself. And that is not something that everyone can achieve, but if that is something that you can try and implement with your workplaces, please do, because the burden of constantly needing to earn money is very real for a lot of us, and it is hard to be able to step away from that. So I'm here to tell you, please take time for self-care. Please look after yourselves. This is important. You are important, all of you, right? And you can't do things well if you don't feel well, as the little bird says. All right. So how do we look after ourselves? What are the things that we can put in place to make sure that we are healthy and happy? I took this because, again, I love Hamilton and I love Lin-Manuel Miranda. Yeah, just reading that, I've had an anxious pit in my stomach since I woke up this morning, and I've been back on Twitter for one day, and I don't think that's a coincidence. Social media is a lot. It's overwhelming, it's terrifying, it's scary. Yes, there are very, very good things to social media. I am on there too often. Who here uses Twitter? Just generally, who here uses it on a daily basis? Who here thinks they use it a bit too much? Yeah, there's a lot of people here. Like it or not, it does affect our stress levels. The Huffington Post did a survey in 2017 where they looked to their reader base, and they asked people who were frequent social media users and unfrequent users, or just don't use it at all. And they found that those who are social network users are 14% more likely to describe their lives as at least somewhat stressful, right? Why do we get more stressed because of social media? You may not, and that's really good, because you've probably curated your feed to look after you. and we'll get to how to do that. But it's because we're constantly taking info about others, right? We've got our friends, we've got maybe our family on there, and then we've got Twitter and Facebook don't make it easy to tune out what they like and what they respond to, and that may not be information that we need. It's good to keep on top of world events. It's good to keep on top of politics. It's also good to know when to step back and step away from it, because that negative noise that is all around us is not something that we were designed to absorb 24/7. If you can't, so switching it off is ideal, like actively switching off your phone and moving away, or like disabling your Twitter account is ideal if you're in a real anxious state about social media. If you can't and find that really hard, I find that really hard, I haven't been able to do that yet. I try and limit my social media use to my work days. Whenever I'm working, I will be on there, and when I'm not, I will try to step away. Again, that doesn't happen all the time. I've been on social media, especially in the past week and lead up to this conference. So it is really hard to come up with those hard boundaries. But I think the best way to start to do it is to actively start doing it. Actively start training yourself to put down the phone or step away from the computer. If you can't, then we've got curating your feed. We've got, I made a little gift. Look, you can mute things. Mute is great. I don't need to see what Trump says every single day. No one does, really. But you know, you can just go in there and you can just mute specific words, you can mute specific phrases, you can mute accounts. That may not mean that you don't still love that account, but maybe you just need time away from that account, just for a little bit. Yeah, that's a little way you can just go into your settings. This is just on the Twitter desktop. You can do it on your phone, you can do it in, I think you can do it in TweetDeck. There's a whole bunch of different ways you can do it. All right. Other things we can be doing. Go outside. Outside is nice, generally. It's not that scary. I guess it depends on what neighborhood you're in. But yeah, it's nice to just get away for a little bit. Have a hobby that takes you outside. Exercise. That's what people keep on telling me to do. I try to. But I do genuinely feel a lot better after I've exercised, after I've gone for a walk. I go to a Pilates class once a week. That's a little bit of social time, as well as active time. Do find activities that work for you and stick to them, right? Because your mental health and your physical health will thank you for it. There's also journaling. I've tried journaling a few times. It hasn't worked for me in ways that it's worked for others, but I kept it in here because, again, it might work for you. I found journaling to be really scary because I would just got like a blank journal, started writing in it, and then after 3 or 4 days, I got intimidated by and had blank page syndrome. Like, I just didn't know what to write. And also, I started mentally feeling better, which meant that I was less inclined to keep on top of the coping mechanism. So now I've got a journal that actively has prompts in it already. That's been really good. If you can't get an actual journal or just don't want to write, there's that app, it's called Self-Care, and it's by True Love Media, and they have a journaling feature in there that give you little prompts, and you can just pick and choose which prompt and just like type out a couple of sentences on how that makes you feel. And I find that once I start working on that, once I start writing down how I feel, a whole lot of other things start coming out. So it's good to start getting your emotions and what you're going through out on the page, as there is clinical evidence that writing out traumatic thoughts or stressful thoughts do really help us work through them. Mindfulness. Mindfulness is a bit of a buzzword. A lot of people know of it, but don't really know how to practice it. It doesn't just mean meditate in a dark room for an hour at a time. It can go, you can choose to meditate, you can choose to practice something mindfully. I know I've seen people do walking meditations, there's even just going outside and doing grounding exercises. There's a bunch of different ways to connect. It's just up to you to kind of practice and find out which one works best for you. It reduces rumination, it reduces stress, it improves memory, it improves focus, improves stable emotions, relationships, and cognition, right? So there's a whole bunch of things that it does actively help you with. It's a way of training your brain, essentially. There's lots of apps out there. There's Headspace, there's Calm. I know those have paid plans. I think the one that I last used that was free, I hope it is still free, is called Insight Timer. The quality of that one may differ slightly because a bunch of people can just put up whatever kind of meditation they want on there. But there are a bunch of trained professionals on there that do their own little mindfulness techniques on there. My last two notes for here is just therapy and play games. Therapy is good. It's daunting. A lot of us don't really talk about therapy, but it is good and it is valid. And a lot of people that I've talked to have said, no, I just don't feel like I'm bad enough to go to therapy. You don't have to be bad enough to go to therapy. If you're feeling down or upset or just needing a little bit of time to work things out, if you can afford it, seek out professional help. Because even the smallest things can be worked out by therapy. There's no barrier of entry. And play games. Play games that you like. Play games that make you feel good. Whatever works for you. I play The Sims a lot, more than I should, probably. But like, I'm an anxious person. The Sims makes me feel like I'm in control, right? You might like, I don't know, you might like Doom, you might like the being able to like work out your stress by shooting a bunch of things. You might like a puzzle game. There's a whole bunch out there. Play games that make you feel good. That's a bunch of techniques. That's a bunch of things that we can use to work on ourselves and we can share with others. But what it ultimately comes down to is practice. Self-care is a learnt skill. There is no band-aid solution. I have fallen down the rabbit hole multiple times where I'll be in a really bad space and I'll go, okay, I need to work on myself now. I will do all the things. I will journal, I will exercise vigorously, I will meditate, and I'll have all those things that I'm doing, and I'll do that for like a week. And then it's gone, right? And then all of a sudden I'm stressed again and I'm like, I wonder why. There's a reason. Keep practicing and find a way to connect that works for you. If you want to, if you're the type of person who likes to keep lists, likes to plan things, write down meditate, write down journaling, write down exercise, and tick those things off as you go through the day and complete them. That's just a very visually satisfying cue to have. What else have I got? And find ways to connect that work within your lifestyle as well. If you are a morning person and like to get up early and find that you are just much more aware, maybe practice then, or maybe use it as a way to wind down at the end of the day. Like find times in your work day to connect, and make sure you stick to those times. Like, build it as part of your routine. All right. So now we know how to look after ourselves. How do we look after others? Ice cream, obviously. But really, I actually thought about naming this slide, why do I have to look after others? I think when we're feeling overwhelmed, the idea of having to look after others and being mindful of those around us is just too much. It's just really scary to think that other humans are depending on you. That usually makes me want to run and hide. So what can we put in place to make sure that our workplace is happy and healthy? I got a few stats. From the Business Insider article that they did on Nintendo Japan earlier this year. I'm not really going to concentrate on the number of employees or too much on the annual salary because we are mostly indie down here, so those things aren't super relevant to us. But what I am going to focus on is the average length of employment and the average workday. That's a long time to stay at one company, 13.5 years. And that's awesome that people felt that they could grow and develop as a person and as a professional in one workplace. They felt supported enough to keep working there, and they have felt like they are continually learning, right? That's what we want out of our jobs. We want to be able to be stable, secure, and continually learning, right? And I think that's also due to the fact that the average workday is 7 hours and 45 minutes. Keep your workdays to 8 hours, you know? Like, overtime is what kills us. That's what leads to crunch. That's what hurts our industry. Structure things, and we're going to go into structure a little later on, but structure your workday and structure your employee policy to make sure that people can go home at the end of the day. It's really important to feel like you can leave your workplace, you can switch off completely and go out there and live your life, right? We want to keep on creating a stable workplace. We want to create a place where employees feel safe. And by doing that, we will start to create a stable industry. And I think that's what ultimately we all want. We want to be paid fairly, we want to be able to work fair hours, and we want to be able to have actual work-life balance. If you want to take a photo of any slide, this is probably the one, because this is a mental health first aid plan that you can implement into your workplace. For context, I did a mental health first aid certificate at the start of this year, so I'm certified as a first aid officer in mental health. And this is the approach that they take when someone is going through a crisis. So this is that person who has gotten to their breaking point in the workplace, and that may be due to work-related stress, that may be due to something else. But they want to know that they can feel safe in the workplace no matter what is happening around them. So we've got algae. The first one, A, is approach the person, assess, and assist in the crisis. Quietly approach them, don't make a big scene about it, and you know, if they want to talk to you, they will. Just let them know that you are there for them. The next one is listen and communicate non-judgmentally. The non-judgmentally part is a big part of this. That is something, as humans, a lot of us are judgmental. That's just a fact of being human. And we might know this, we might not. It might be an unconscious bias. But practicing listening non-judgmentally and just being there for the person is the best thing that they can have in their time of need. If they are open to it, afterwards, you can give them support and information. This kind of support and information could be something like professional resources that are available in their area or what's available online. I have a link at the end of this slide, at the end of this talk, which links people to our global resources page on Checkpoint that has a good outline on what is available within Australia, New Zealand, US, and I think we've got the UK and Japan and Southeast Asia on there as well. Plus we've got a whole bunch of online resources that people can access from just about anywhere in the world. It's important that the person does not feel pressured to get help. You can't make them get help. You can only be there to offer support and encourage it if they need it, which leads into our next point. Encourage the person to get professional help. Again, it is their decision. You cannot force anyone to do anything, but it is their decision to go. But if you can say, hey, our work is happy for you to go and get help, it is important that you're looked after, and we feel if you're needing to do this, we support you. And finally, encourage other supports. Encourage them to talk to their friends and family. If you're going through a crisis, you're going to need your support network. Do everything you can to make sure that that person is looked after. We've also got the AAA method, which I mentioned. I've got some handbooks. They haven't quite arrived yet. I'm hoping they'll arrive this afternoon. But otherwise, I'll be around the Harvard Garden space for the rest of the 3 days, essentially. Definitely tomorrow I'll have the books on hand if you want to come and grab them and take a look at them. But the AAA handbook is basically a method that you can use and implement into your workplace in whichever way works for you. Again, this can be used like annually, this can be used half yearly, quarterly, whatever works, but encourages you to audit. So take a look at everything that is happening in your workplace at the moment, from your employees/co-workers to your directors. Check in with how they're feeling, how their work is going, do all of that. That's a lot to take in. What do we do after we take it in? We accept. We don't judge. We don't freak out if things are happening or not happening. We accept the situation, and then we act on it. We basically put in structures and supports to make sure that the bad things that are happening don't continue to happen, and that the good things continue to thrive, right? So I've got a bunch of little points that I'm going to go through now that basically work in tandem with both ALGAE and the AAA handbook on what kind of things you should be implementing. All right. Have a curfew. I kind of ranted about this before, but let people go home. Let people feel the need that they can switch off. That curfew could be, hey, our workplace works from 10 till 6. Or we only work from 8 hours. If you're more of a night owl, you can work from 12 till 8, right? Again, every person is different. Every workplace is different. But find a curfew and stick to it. Make sure you don't have people who are working out of those hours. Again, that is hard to do when there's a lot of unseen labor that goes into games, where there's a lot of, like I'm a community manager, I have a lot of people contacting me from all hours of the day, right? I will wake up and I will see my phone and like everything's on fire. And it's hard to manage, but make sure you give people time in lieu for that time where they're working out of hours. Encourage autonomy. No one likes to be micromanaged. That puts a lot of burden on you, and that puts a lot of burden on them, because essentially you are telling the person that what they've been hired to do, they're not doing it right. So micromanaging can actually be quite demeaning. So listen to your employees and how they work, and how you can continue to look after them. Manage resources, and manage resources with crunch in mind, right? Projects get away from us, deadlines get away from us, and sometimes we find ourselves spiraling. If you have planned 1 month to do a task, plan for it to take 2 or 6 weeks, budget a little bit of leeway. At the end of the day, you'll end up ahead of the project if everything does go according to plan, and that's a nice thing, right? We want that. So plan for things to take us twice as long as you think they're actually going to take. Ensure consistency of the team. Again, this is very personal, and it requires you really listening to what your team needs. Put in practices that can help them, again, if that's a curfew, or if that's an open door policy, or something if they need leave, like listen to them and ensure that it is consistent. Don't say yes to one person if they've asked for leave and no to another for a varying reason. Like, these kind of policies should be consistent across the board. Check in. Ask people if they're okay. And ask them if they're okay twice. Because the first time we're asked if we're okay, we just say, yeah, or yeah, I'm fine. There's an automatic response there with, are you okay? On the second time, it kind of forces you to think, and I've kind of pinched this tip from my boss, because she says it to me all the time. But it forces you to think about, am I actually doing okay? And I think that's really important, to kind of have that transparency with those around you. Validate. Validating people doesn't need to be monetary. It can be as simple as, hey, that last art asset you created, that was awesome. Thank you so much for doing that. Or thank you for taking the time out of your personal life to manage that social media crisis we had. You did a really good job. We couldn't have done that without you. Validating goes a long way. You feel good that that person is in your team and has your back, and they feel good because they know that they are cared for in the workplace. Encourage personal creative pursuits. Now, you can't do this if you don't have time out of work to be creative. We heard from Anne earlier this morning that, sleep doesn't make for, lack of sleep doesn't make for the most creative person, right? People need time to be able to work on their own interests, and they're most motivated for work when they feel like they do have enough time to do that. They can take that creative energy and channel it back into their work, right? Have an open door policy. This can be a big one and a hard one to manage, especially if you have a team that's working remotely or if you're working with a lot of contractors. Things can go unnoticed. Check-ins might not happen on time, but it's really important for contractors, employees, directors, whoever, to just be able to feel like they can come to you with whatever they're going through. If someone asks you for their time and you are not up to it, that's okay. Just be clear about that. Let them know that you're not doing too well at the moment or you don't have time at the moment, and say, hey, I will check in with you later this week. Let's try for Wednesday at 11 a.m. maybe? Yeah, and then pencil that in. Make an actual meeting time for it so that a person knows that they will get looked after. And then finally, have a mental health procedure. I've given you one. It's algae. That is something that you can implement in your workplace right now. There's a whole bunch of first aid resources online about that as well. Algae and the AAA handbook and all that kind of stuff helps us catch mental health and potentially catch mental illness before it gets too bad that the employee feels that they need to leave, right? That's horrible. That's worst case scenario. And that happens horribly often in this industry, right? These kind of things will go unnoticed, they will go unsaid, a person feels like they're in an unsupportive work environment, and then they just bail, right? And then that is on you, the employer, to find their replacement. And that wastes time and money. Plus you've got someone who is feeling incredibly burnt out and horrible thanks to the lack of procedure at your workplace. So this is why this kind of stuff is really important. Final resources. I'm at the end of my talk. This is it. I've got a bunch of links, and I will actually put this slide up on my Twitter later on today, or on Checkpoints, probably both, where you'll be able to just click on them. But evidence-based mental health for game devs is part of our web series. So you can just plug in that title into YouTube and you'll find the episode. And I took a fair bit of stuff and kind of built on it here, so that's a good complementary thing to watch if you're interested in furthering that. Checkpointorg.com/global is our global healthline resources, and then I've mentioned the AAA handbook and the coping companion, which will be around throughout Games Week. That's it. Any questions? Do I pick or do I ask them to come to the mic? What's the... All right, I can... Cool. I saw you first. Hi.
Yeah, hi. Good talk.
Thank you.
So, I work on a team where we have one person who's one of the more senior people that works all the time. He's never off slack, he works on the weekends, he does all these things.
Yeah.
I'm concerned he's setting a really bad example for the younger people.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Is it ever healthy to have a person like that? Because I think, I talk to people in the industry all the time, and there is this idea that, you can just let the people, like some people are okay with that.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
do that. But is that ever healthy? And how would you approach, if not, because you talked earlier about this,
Yeah.
answer, but how would you approach rectifying it?
That is really hard for me personally. I did have a workplace that had their higher ups working all the time, and that made me feel incredibly anxious and felt like I needed to be working harder constantly. So that is something to be mindful of, that the juniors, the youngers, may feel like they need to do that. I guess I would kind of have a chat with that person and check in if they're okay, and if there's anything that can be delegated, what kind of resources can you manage. They may just like working all the time. That's another thing that I didn't really touch on, because it's hard to kind of delve into that when a person is engaging with that constantly, and it's semi-healthy, I guess, for them. It's not the best thing in the world, because ultimately that may catch up with them. You know, we can't tell right now, but 5 years into the future, who knows? But probably just check in and let them know that they can delegate if and when needed. That would probably be my starting point. Yeah. Oh, anyone else? Yes. Hi.
So at a previous workplace, we often had sort of like crunchy periods,
Mm-hmm.
and when people worked like over hours to get something done, it was
Yep.
often sort of celebrated internally. Or,
Yeah.
everybody would be like, "Oh, you're a legend for doing that.
Yeah.
It's great work." And so I was wondering how you feel about that, like this sense of validation, but when it's validating maybe
Like
like
the start of toxic behaviors, essentially. Yeah. I think that's something that it's hard, because you want that person to feel like they have done really well in a time of crisis, in a time of crunch, but you also don't want to continue that behavior, right? Like that should only be done in emergencies or when absolutely needs to happen. Yeah, it's hard to reward and then not, like, kind of take it back at the same time. I'll have a think about that one, though. Yes. Hi. Oh, yeah.
Add to that,
Please do.
would be you want to celebrate like the inception of that moment, like
Mm.
practice being had to whether that was great. I actually had the opportunity to do some work over in Germany in my career, and while I was there, one thing I found really interesting about their attitude in Germany is you have to do overtime during competent. Their attitude is work really hard
Yeah.
from the 9 to 5, get all your stuff done.
Yeah.
It's super productive. And like that's their culture, and I thought that was awesome. That was wow. Like coming from like other companies where I've done like crazy crunch periods.
Yeah, absolutely.
Late hours, weeks and weeks and weeks, and then realize that it's like, oh yeah, this is a much better way of thinking.
Yep.
Healthier. But that said, they work really hard.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
almost an adjustment. But that I thought was quite a much healthier way to look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as someone who maybe, if there are any like studio managers or producers in the room, and you know that periods of crunch happen and you're trying to mitigate that, let the person know that, all right, you were there in that time of crisis. How can we work towards a lifestyle where that time of crisis doesn't happen in the future, and start laying out the frameworks and the plans together as a team? Like, let your team know that you are working on it. That's a big thing. Yes. Absolutely. Same. Yeah. Anyone else? Hi.
So going back to like the coaching, similar to the question I was asked earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm working with someone currently who likes to work a lot and they do a lot of overtime.
Yep.
But I am quite worried for them because recently they've got to the stage where they didn't eat for 2 days. They just saw the time go by
Oh.
and got quite sick.
Yeah.
Do you know any ways? Like I've also talked to them openly, if like you do need to get rest and look after yourself.
Yes.
If you need any help, tell us.
Yeah.
But they just say, oh, I just like to work and I see the time go by. What would be a decent way that I could like try and help them, or like try to get them to take some of the workload off and just get them to rest?
It kind of reminds me of like when Anne was saying how we kind of feel that our passion drives us to work to this point where we just keep working and everything else fades into the background, essentially. And that is really common because we are passionate about what we do. We are excited by what we do. We're creating games. We're in a creative industry. That's awesome. If you can just kind of encourage them to channel that into a different avenue, like say if you just want to work like 8 hours a day and have structured breaks, or if you need to delegate things, let me know. Like give them actionable things that they could actually delegate, or help them prioritize their schedule. I think that's a big one, and a lot of us don't know how to prioritize our schedule, which is what leads to overwork in the first place, because we feel like we need to get everything done as soon as possible. but again, it's up to them to try and change their habits. Like you can say all these things and you can help them as much as possible, but they've got to make that decision. Yeah. Anyone else? I think we're good. Yeah. Oh, one more. Hi.
Do you find particular different ways of running projects have better effects than others? Like I found agiles tend to have a much better for avoiding crunch.
It
Do you have anything better than that, or is that best as
We kind of prescribe to the agile methods ourselves, like we have stand-ups and stuff like that, and that's great for being able to keep people accountable. As I said at the start, we're a remote team. That is really hard to keep on top of when your team is all over the place and may have other jobs to tend to. So the weeks that I may have no communication from others are probably the hardest. And that's something production-wise I'm trying to figure out how to get people talking more and how to make sure that we're basically all on the same page. Agile is the first framework that I've kind of properly worked with. Like I've studied a few others and that's kind of working for us, but I'm looking at different ways to kind of implement that. Yeah, thank you. All right. Cheers.